So what happens on a typical day in Scrum? You know, one of those days where you're actually supposed to go and do some work? Well, we've got our big picture here of Scrum, and what we're going to talk about next is something called the Daily Scrum meeting. Now, the Daily Scrum meeting is a 15-minute meeting that happens, well, daily, because it's called the Daily Scrum meeting, and it's for the development team. And it's the chance for the development team to inspect and adapt on a 24-hour basis. Now, this is probably the first time we were saying inspect and adapt, so let's talk a little bit about what that means. And the inspect part is you're going to look at where you are, what you've done, and what you have left in the sprint. And the adapt part is, if necessary, you're going to change your plan for how you're going to deliver that done working software. Now, put another way, where the goal of the sprint planning meeting was to establish a plan for the entire sprint, the goal of the Daily Scrum is to check where you're at as a team and come up with a plan for the next 24 hours for how you're going to get that done working software at the end of the sprint. Now, while you're doing that, the team is typically going to try to determine the number of remaining hours that you have for each task and total that up. So you're going to take the total of the remaining work, so the remaining hours on all tasks, and you're going to record that number. And you're going to record it on something called the sprint burndown chart. Now, you don't have to do this, but it certainly is helpful. This is not required by Scrum, but it's a really good idea. Now, that burndown chart in TFS is going to look something like this. On the left-hand side, you're going to have the start of the sprint. Right-hand side, you're going to have the end of the sprint. And then in between, on every single day, you're going to plot the number of remaining hours for all the work that's left in the sprint on the graph. Now, TFS will do that for you, which is really nice. It also provides this thing called the ideal trend line. So the ideal trend line shows you in an ideal world, and in a perfect world, how many hours would you have left on that day of the sprint? So you can see on the left-hand side, you've got a little bit more than 60 hours for ideal trend. And at the end of the sprint, you ideally end with 0 remaining hours of work in the sprint. Now, the sprint burndown chart is really helpful in the Daily Scrum meeting because it helps the teams to visualize their status and their progress towards delivering that work. Now, let's look at this one more time. So if you've got the ideal trend line, if you're below the ideal trend line, that means that you're probably ahead of schedule. If you're above the ideal trend line, that means that you're could be behind schedule. So you're going to look at this in the Daily Scrum meeting, and if it looks good, then you're going to continue doing what you're doing. But if it looks bad, maybe you need to inspect and adapt. Now, another part of that inspect and adapt activity you do at the Daily Scrum is to identify impediments. And an impediment is anything that's slowing down the team towards delivering that done working software. Now, the Scrum Master, one of the big things that the Scrum Master is going to do is to help the team to identify the impediments and to ensure that they're being addressed. So if the team says, oh, this is slowing us down, well, the Scrum Master, might not actually fix the problem his or herself, but the Scrum Master is responsible for making sure those impediments are being worked somehow, are being addressed somehow. And speaking of that Scrum Master, one of the things that is sometimes surprising to teams is that the Scrum Master doesn't actually have to attend the Daily Scrum meeting. There's no requirement that that person has to even be there. And the reason why is that the Daily Scrum is for the benefit of the development team. So the people that are doing the work, they're not reporting status to the Scrum Master or anything like that. It's a self-organization kind of thing. The team is going to talk amongst themselves to figure out how they're doing towards meeting that sprint goal of the done working software at the end of the sprint. So the only requirement that the Scrum Master has in relation to the Daily Scrum meeting is that the Scrum Master makes sure that the Daily Scrum meeting actually happens and that it's productive. Why would you in any world not have the Scrum Master there? Well, let's talk through a couple hypothetical examples. So in hypothetical scenario number 1, you've got the Scrum Master, you've got the development team. Scrum Master says, sorry, I missed the Daily Scrum today. I had a dentist appointment. Anything I need to know about? And the development team says, nope, we're fine. Scrum Master says, great. And that's the end of hypothetical scenario number 1. But let's take a different scenario. Scrum Master, dev team, Scrum Master says, sorry, I missed the Daily Scrum today. I had a dentist appointment. Anything I need to know about? The development team says, PBI-A is not going so well, and PBI-B is blocked because the IT organization has not gotten us that server we need yet. And Scrum Master says, oh, well, that's not entirely awesome. What do you guys want to do about it? Development team then says, well, let's talk to the product owner and let's see if we can de-scope PBI-A a bit, maybe bring it back in line. And then for PBI-B, it's at risk, but let's see if we can lean on IT just a little bit and maybe get us that server we need. Scrum Master says, okay, great. I'll talk to IT and the product owner and we'll see how it goes. And those are a couple examples of how you might handle the Scrum Master not actually being there at the daily Scrum. But more realistically, the Scrum Master is going to be there every single day because it's a really good idea. And then you don't have to worry about that after the fact catching up stuff. So let's recap the daily Scrum meeting. Happens every day. That's why it's called the daily Scrum. And it's your chance to inspect and adapt on a 24-hour basis. So you're going to review the progress that the team has made so far. So the team is going to review its own progress and establish a plan for the next 24 hours. You're going to hopefully identify any impediments that have showed up. And you're going to keep this meeting really crisp, really, really fast, maximum of 15 minutes. If you're going longer than 15 minutes, you're doing something wrong. Next up, we're going to talk about the sprint review and the sprint retrospective meetings.